Kelly Arena, thanks for the update. Appreciate it very much. Now, pretty much on the same note, FBI Director Mueller and Attorney General Ashcroft went out of their way today to stress that the government's interviews, as Kelly just mentioned, with thousands of Iraqi Americans were voluntary, but civil libertarians remain very concerned. To discuss civil liberties in a war time, I am joined from Wilmington, Delaware by Ting. He was Assistant Commissioner at the Immigration and Naturalization Service in the early 1990s. He now teaches immigration law at Temple University. And joining us from San Diego tonight, Hussein Ibish. He is the Communications Director for the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee. Welcome to you both. Glad to have you both with us.
Thank you so much. Nice to be here.
Mr. Ibish, I'm going to start with you this evening. You heard some of the statistics FBI Director Mueller just shared with us. Out of the 10,000 interviews, 250 reports led to very useful information on either weapons production or weapons storage. Do you agree this is powerful information for the U.S. to have?
Well, I'm sure that some Iraqi Americans or Iraqis living in the United States had that kind of information about the storage facilities and bunkers and things like that, but I don't believe 11,000 did. And I don't think that you need a program that goes after 11,000 people to find out. I mean, those are things that would be known by former senior government officials, former Army officers, certainly not the huge swathe of people that have been interviewed. And I would like to say that not all of the statistics that we heard today were entirely accurate. This notion that there were only 2 formal complaints, I don't think is right, because we know of at least 5 serious problems that emerged in 5 separate incidents that have been reported to the Justice Department through our group alone. So you know, there's a little bit more to this than I think we were being led to believe today.
Some would argue that might be an acceptable ratio, whether it's 2 or 5 formal complaints. Mr. Ting, do you think it was worth it for the kind of information Mr. Mueller said was delivered here?
Well, I think unquestionably in a time of war, we want our government to be asking questions. We want our government to be gathering information. Indeed, part of the criticism of our government prior to 9/11 was that they weren't asking questions, that they didn't do a good job on the intelligence side. It's the role of government to ask questions. I think, you know, Mr. Ibish says, well, why don't you just go directly to the people that have the information? Well, it's not always easy to know who's got the information. You've always got to ask more people questions than people who have answers. We do know that the overwhelming majority of Iraqi Americans are very enthusiastically in support of the military action in Iraq, and they've shown their support in tangible ways by providing material, information, and support to this war effort.
I think the question really, though, has to be, you know, do we really want to investigate thousands, tens of thousands, multiple thousands of people based on their national origin? Because, among other things, this is an investigation. Among other things, this information will be added to various databases, like the interviews with 8,000 students last year. And what we're developing here is a mentality, I think, that says that certain people are of interest to the authorities and in some cases suspicious, potentially dangerous, because of their national origin. So there are costs to this as well. Costs to our values of being a country that doesn't discriminate on the basis of, for instance, national origin. And there's no question that to break people up and divide them into different pools based on the country they came from is discriminatory, and that to investigate people based on that, which is in fact what this is, does carry with it the stigma of discrimination. I just think there's no question about that.
Can you address that question? Why isn't this racial profiling?
Well, it's not racial profiling to the extent that it's completely voluntary. People don't have to respond to these particular series of questions. The questioning of students was not voluntary. That was an exercise of the immigration power, but it's like comparing apples and oranges.
Yeah, but can I just address that for a second?
Let me just respond to your point. I mean, I think it is the role of the government. You do need to ask more questions than you are going to get answers. You need to talk to, if you're going to have 250 people supply you with useful information, you're going to have to talk to a lot more than 250 people to get that number.
He said 250 reports. He didn't say 250 people. 250 reports. 250 they may have come from a much smaller group. Let me just say something about your other point, though. The voluntary aspect of this is not absolute. We've heard many cases of people who've said, okay, and I'll cooperate, but I want to bring an attorney, and being threatened. Or I'll cooperate, but I really don't want to meet you today. I'd like to meet you tomorrow or the day after. And then being told, no, if you're going to cooperate, it has to be now. So, you know, and in an immigrant community,
but no one
this
was told they couldn't
voluntary-
bring an attorney. No one was told they couldn't bring an
no
attorney.
one was told they couldn't bring an attorney, but they were given vague threats that, okay, if that's the way we want to play it, then that's the way we're going to play it. You know, there has been some of this has been conducted in an intimidating manner, and that probably has more to do with the people who are actually conducting the policy rather than the policy itself. But
Well,
we have to understand
okay,
that is
hang
going to
on
happen.
1 second. Mr. Ibish, let Mr. Ting respond to that. Do
Sometimes,
you understand
sometimes-
why some of these people interviewed felt intimidated or threatened, maybe if it wasn't even in an overt way?
Well, sometimes intimidation is in the eye of the beholder. You know, I can't say that our government is perfect, that it never makes mistakes. I can say that the government has a primary responsibility here to support the effort of our men and women overseas as they engage in war, and to protect the American people against terrorist attacks at home.
I think we all agree
I think
with
the
that.
government is carrying out that responsibility in a responsible and modulated way. I think to the extent that there's any kind of strict scrutiny warranted in what the government is doing, I think that test is well satisfied in that the government has a compelling interest that it's pursuing, and it's pursuing that compelling interest in a narrowly defined way.
Well,
Mr. Ibish, let me close
think,
with this
okay,
question.
sure
You had attorneys present in a
That's
couple
correct.
hundred of these interviews.
Attorneys or
If there
other
were
observers.
if you said only 5 formal complaints, the government is saying 2 formal complaints.
That we know of, yes.
If these attorneys had a problem with the tone of these interviews, why weren't there more formal complaints?
Well, I mean, because we were certainly not privy to the whole 10,000. And I think that it is not a question of how many instances did the government overstep its authority, or how many times were there abuses that were against the law. The question is whether it's reasonable government policy, whether it really makes us any safer to cast such a wide net, to interview tens of thousands of people based solely on their national origin. In fact, to start again using national origin as a determining factor in deciding who's suspicious. I think there's
Ting,
a
you
real
get the
plus
last
there.
word.
It's absolutely,
He brings up an interesting point. Do you see any danger, Mr. Ting, to this program being expanded to other groups?
Well, it's absolutely a reasonable policy that the government has carried out here. We can't just sit back and say, well, people that have useful information, we'll wait for them to come in. You have to go out and find that information. We know that the overwhelming majority of Iraqi Americans and Iraqi immigrants to the United States want to be helpful to the United States. So I think it is highly responsible for the United States government to go out and ask for that help. You seek and ye shall find. Should we keep an eye on what our government is doing? Absolutely. You know, we know that government is capable of committing excesses against civil liberties, but I think the reality is, you know, we have to remember the story of the little boy who cried wolf. Let's not cry wolf too soon. Let's just keep an eye and see what happens, and if something bad happens, then that will be the time to complain.
Mr.
Well,
Ibish, I can only give you 10 seconds, and we got to move on.
Well, I think it does cross the line to basically start erecting a whole set of policies that essentially cast people as suspicious just because of the country they came from. And that is, in effect, what this policy and at least 7 or 8 other new policies since September 11th have done. We don't need that to be safe. We really don't.
On that note of discord, we must end this segment. Hussein Ibish, Jan Ting, thank you for both of your perspectives this evening. Still to come tonight, he was shot down over Iraq 12